Dear students, let us discuss another topic, that is the origin of chordates. Uh, Origin of chordates is obscure because scientists have not succeeded in determining which lower forms have given rise to them. Lower form means the non-chordates, the invertebrates. Form means which group or phylum. Why it is so? Because the early chordate ancestor were soft-bodied and have not left any fossil remains. Whenever we have to study the origin of any group, we have to look at the fossil record preserved in the earth, which is depicting some earlier forms, from which we can infer which group have given rise to which group based on the similarity and dissimilarity. But because the ancestor of the chordate were soft-bodied, they were not well preserved in the fossil record, so direct evidence is missing. Hence, scientists remain obscure in tracing the origin of the chordates. So, the only basis of judging the origin of group comes from resemblance between lower chordates and invertebrates. So, at present, lower chordates means the Eurocardiate, Cephalocardiate, Hemicardiate. Though the the hemicardiates are not considered present under chordate, but earlier they were placed in the classification under the lower chordates. So the resemblance between invertebrate group, that means the uh, group prior to the group of Iconodermates, that means protozoa, porifera, coelentata, platyhelminth, and then up to Iconodermates. When they are compared with the lower chordates, then there is some judgment of the scientist is there that uh, that speaks of the origin of the chordates. So they look in both of these groups. That means the lower chordates and the invertebrates, the bilateral symmetry, the anterior posterior body axis, triploblastic cylomatic conditions, and metameric segmentations. So it means when you are going to trace that which group of the invertebrate has given rise to the chordates, so then you have to look that those groups are can be the possible ancestors which are having these features, because these features are also present in the chordates. There are various theories put forth by the scientist which speaks of the origin of the ancestor of chordates. That means which group of invertebrate can be the ancestor of the chordates. All these theories, they speak that either the chordates have arisen directly from some group of the invertebrates, or the higher chordates have arisen by the intervention of the protochordates. That means from the invertebrate groups, first the protochordates, the Eurocardiate, the Cephalocardiate have risen, and then the higher chordates have evolved from them. Uh, for while looking at the possible group, which group can be held responsible or can be held ancestor of the chordate, all groups are tried, like phylum Coelentata, Nematine, Phoronida, Annelida, Arthropoda, Echinodermata. After having an investigation into all of these groups, that which can be held the ancestor of the chordates, none of other group except the Echinodermate have uh, given a satisfactory and convincing uh, suggestion that they can be considered the you can say the ancestor of the chordates. Why? because other groups were not resembling much with the chordates. So this theory, the Iconoderm theory, that means the Iconoderms are the ancestor of the chordates, can be discussed under the deuterostome line of chordate ancestry. So it means deuterostome, deuterostome group starts from the Iconodermates and then all the chordates. Prior to Iconodermates, they were the protostomes. So it means chordates have arisen from the deuterostome like creatures. They have not arisen from protostomes like creatures. That means from echinodermates, prior to echinodermates, no phylum can be held as direct or indirect evolutionary ancestor or the predator of the modern chordates. And deuterostome, that I have already given you. The difference between these two is that if the mouth of the future embryo is developed from the pore of the blastula, it is protostome, and if the pore of the blastula gives rise to anus and mouth develop away from it, that means it is deuterostome. And from echinodermates onwards, whole of the chordates and the echinodermates, they are deuterostomes. So deuterostome line of ancestry will speaks of whether they have arisen from the echinoderm, whether they have chordates have arisen from hemichordate or Eurocardiate or Cephalocardiate, and that there is a Barrington hypothesis which also speaks of the origin of the chordates. So let us look at the echinoderm ancestry. Uh, on the basis of anatomical, embryological, that means internal structures, and the embryological features, then the fossil record, then the biochemical uh, characteristic features, the blood characteristic features. All these are the evidence uh, which were assessed by various workers, and they had tried to establish that chordates probably had originated directly from some primitive echinoderms and some echinoderm larvae or some echinoderm larvae. So it means if echinoderms are the ancestors of the chordates, then they are not the echinoderms that we are looking presently. They were the primitive echinoderms or some echinoderm larvae, because larvae are again the primitive structures. So due to the resemblance of the echinoderms with the chordates, uh, Muller and Bateson suggested a common ancestry of both echinoderm and hemichordates. So again, that doesn't mean that the echinoderms uh, and the hemichordate were earlier considered to be a group of the chordate. So that doesn't mean that the chordate have evolved directly from the primitive echinoderms. No, based on the similarity, they suggest that they have common ancestry. That means this is the echinoderm, this is the hemichordate, a cornworm, the starfish. Then this is the larva of the two. So uh, they have a common ancestry because there is no fossil record. So it is called the hypothetical larva. So it means they have suggested, these two scientists have suggested that the the hemichordate and the chordate were having the same or the were evolved from the same ancestor. It is based upon the resemblance. Why from same ancestor? Because the larvae of the two resemble much with each other. They resemble in their small size. Both are transparent. Both are free swimming. Both are bilaterally symmetrical. Both have ciliary band. Both have digestive system, complete digestive system. Mouth on the ventral side. Then posteriorly they have the anus. So these features are very much similar in both the larvae. So it is presumed that the hemichordate and the echinoderms, they might have evolved from the same ancestor. They might have same ancestor in the past. Then, when the fossil record of Cambrian and Ordovician period, that is 540 million years ago and 585.4 million years ago, respectively, were assessed by the scientists, then they have noticed that these two periods were having the carpoid echinoderms. Carpoid echinoderms means the unusual echinoderms that are now extinct, not the present echinoderms. They are extinct now and they are unusual. Because why they are unusual? Because they don't have the characteristic feature of the modern echinoderms like the radial symmetry or the water vascular system. So, because of the presence of carpoid echinoderms in both of these two periods, Toston and Gilston assumed that carpoid echinoderm might have evolved from Tarnaria larva-like creature. This was the larva-like Tarnaria larva. So they assumed that this was a creature similar to this Carnaria larva was the ancestor from which the echinoderms have evolved. No, beside this, it was also claimed that in the lower Silurian period, that is 443 to 419.2 million years ago, one carpoid echinoderm had calyx. Calyx is the theca or the protective covering of the body. So they had calyx perforated by series of small apertures, which can be compared with the gill slits of Branchiostome or Cephalocardiate. So again, this point is again suggesting that the carpoid echinoderms, that means primitive echinoderms, not the modern echinoderms, uh, could be the ancestor of the modern chordates because some features like the 16 small apertures, 16 small aperture are resembling with the gill slits of the cephalochordates. So because the presence of gill slits is an important characteristic feature of the chordate. So it means again there is a reference, there is a point indicating towards the ancestry of the carpoid or the primitive chinoderms uh, as an ancestor of the modern chordates. In addition to this, the isolated biochemical theories. Isolated means when the scientists have conducted the experiments at their different point of at the different point of time at different location, not in collaboration. Isolated biochemical studies also suggested diversion of chordate from echinoderm, echinodermates. So again, it means that these biochemical studies are again indicating the same thing, that echinodermates are the potential ancestor of the primitive echinoderms. You must say are the potential ancestor of the modern chordates. Like you can see, other than the echinodermates, all other groups of the non-chordates use arginine phosphate for the transfer of energy. But one group of echinodermate called the ophiurites and the lower chordates, cephalochordates, ascidians, and vertebrates, they use creatine phosphate. So again, there is a resemblance between the echinodermates and the chordates. Whereas the hemichordates and echinodermates, they use both arginine as well as creatinine. So it means hemichordate and these echinodermates are in between the other groups of invertebrates and the chordates because they are using both type of feature which are resembling with the higher chordates and the lower non-chordates. So it means echinoderms have much resemblance, much indications in their characteristic feature for the ancestry of the likely ancestry of the modern chordates. Now let us look other groups of the deuterostomes in the lower chordates which can be held ancestors or not. Like hemichordate, you can say. Uh, Though the hemichordates are sessile and sedentary. So sessile and sedentary is important because the chordates have arisen from the sessile and sedentary ancestor. So, if the hemichordates have sessile and sedentary nature, but they are not held ancestor of the chordates because they don't have the notochord and their body plan is quite different. Adult body plan is quite different, which is not resembling with the vertebrate. Then looking at the Eurocardiate, Eurocardiate ancestor theory was given by the Garstang in 1928, N.J. Beryl in 1955, Romer in 1959, and many other scientists. Again here, adult tunicates are, means the Eurocardates, reflect the primitive sessile, marine, and filter feeding condition of the ancestral chordate. So, ancestral chordate have the characteristic feature. They, by the scientist, it is presumed that ancestral chordate was sessile, it was marine, and it was filter feeder. Though tunicates having these characteristic feature, but again, their body plan is so different that it is impossible to imagine a direct evolutionary transformation of an adult tunicate into vertebrate. So again, Eurocardates are not the potential ancestor of the cardates. Though if you look at the larvae of the Eurocardate and then the larvae of the chordates, like the frog, they both have the tadpole-like feature, have much resemblance. They resemble with each other in their elongated form, bilaterally symmetrical, free swimming. They both have the pharyngeal gill slits. They both have the notochords. Dorsal hollow nerve tube is also present there. Muscular post-anal tail is present in them, but it doesn't mean that the these Eurocardates are the ancestors because adult is not resembling. It is the larva which is resembling with the larvae of the chordates and having the characteristic feature of the chordates. So, then what would be the answer? The answer is that according to this theory, certain of their larvae failed to metamorphose into adult, but became pedogenetically sexually mature and evolved into cephalocardates and vertebrates. So this suggests that the Eurocardates have given rise to cephalocardates and vertebrates, but not the adult of the Eurocardate. It was the larva. Larva, when larva becomes sexually mature without metamorphosing into adult, it is called as pedogenesis. So, the pedogenically, that means by the pedogenesis, the larva has acquired the characteristic feature of the adult. That is, they have become sexually mature, and then they have evolved into cephalocardian vertebrate, not the adult one. Now, if we consider Eurocardate on the basis of the resemblance of the larva, that they are the ancestor of the cardates, what is the drawback in this theory? The drawback is that this theory consider because the Eurocardates are ultimately sessile. Uh, this theory considers sessile Eurocardate to be ancestral to cardates, whereas they are highly specialized because sessile nature is highly specialized in nature because everything is managed by an organism while sitting at the same place. Otherwise, animals wander from here to there in order to fulfill its need, whereas the sessile organism is managing all the things while remaining stick to one place. So, because the adult is sessile, larva is not sessile. Larva of these tunicates, they are uh, they are motile, and the sessility of the adult is basically the specialized character. It is not the it cannot be considered equivalent to the primitive characteristic feature of the sessile ancestor of the chordates. Then let us look at the cephalocardiate ancestry. If we consider cephalocardates or not, cephalocardates, particularly the lancelet like Branchiostoma lanceolatum, possesses chordate features like all the three features: the dorsal hollow nerve cord, the notochord and the pharyngeal gill slits. So it answers the logical structure of a model prevertebrate, that cephalocardiate can be placed at a line just prior to vertebrates, that vertebrates might have arisen from the cephalocardiates. But uh, other than that, if you look at the excretory system of the cephalocardiate and the vertebrate have mesonephric type of kidney, whereas these cephalocardiates have the solenocyte cells, and then they are communicating to the coelom, which is opening through the duct, which cannot be considered, or which is not resembling at all with the mesonephric kidney of the vertebrate. So this feature is against the viewpoint that the cephalocardiate are the ancestor of the cardiates. Again, cephalocardiate don't have the brain, whereas the cardiate have brain. So again, they cannot be considered the ancestor of the cardiate. They don't have the sense organ also, and there is another modification, that they have unique elongation or extension of the notochord beyond the mouth. This is the mouth. Otherwise, if we compare the notochord with the vertebral column of the vertebrates, the vertebral column is always present behind the mouth, whereas the extension of the notochord uh, above and forward position of the mouth is indicating that it cannot be the cephalocardiates cannot be the ancestor of the cardiates. Then what is the answer to the origin of the chordate? Barrington hypothesis is basically mixture of so many viewpoints which explain uh, that how the chordates might have arisen, how they have originated. So it was ELW Barrington 1965 who have given this theory. According to this theory, the primitive lophophorate or arm-feeding creature was the ancestor of the chordates, because there is no fossil evidence or direct evidence. So this is presumption, this is assumption that such type of individual. Arm feeding means the feeding with the help of the tentacles with cilia, and these organisms were probably the sessile or semi-sessile, and these organisms are basically the common ancestor of echinoderms as well as chordate. So they have given rise to uh, three branches. Number one, on one side they have given rise to the progonophores. Progonophores, pogonophores are basically the beard worm living in the deep sea, resembling with the polychaetes. And the other side, they have given rise to the stalked echinoderm. That means echinoderms and the chordate have the same ancestry, might have the same ancestry, but that doesn't mean that the echinoderms are in direct line of the evolution of the chordates. So these primitive lophophorate, after uh, after giving off their tentacles, they become the filter feeders, and they were called the stem chordates. So, uh, gill slits with numerous with mucus secreting endostyle was formed in them. Endostyle is the structure of the organ meant for the filter feeding. So, by changing the tentacle feeding with the filter feeding, another evolutionary step has taken place. Now, the evidence of this is that the living hemichordate in living hemichordates, tentacles with single gill slits, cephalodiscus, a living pterobranch is a transitional stage between two modes of feeding. So, living hemichordate are the transitional are at the transitional stage, which is having some characteristic feature, that is the presence of tentacle, and again also the presence of the gill slits. So, they are indicating that the hemichordates were present at this stage of time. Uh, they are showing the transitional stage, and they have given rise to a filter feeder form. Then, in this filter feeder Further pharyngotomy has taken place. That means pharynx was perforated by, and the perforation of pharynx means development of more gill slits. And after this has taken place, on one side, hemichordates were evolved, and the other side, the sessile ancestral Eurocardiate tunicates were formed. And these sessile Eurocardates were having the tadpole larva, which was having much characteristic feature resembling with the Hyrcardates. So this tadpole larva, with the help of the pedogenesis, acquired the adult characters, increased its size, uh, then longitudinally ciliary bands shifted mid-dorsally and changed into hollow narrow cord. The dorsal cilia develops into endostyle, that is, organ for filter feeding, and muscular tail evolved post at the postanal position. And by acquiring these characters uh, through the pedogenesis, this larva changed into free living ancestor, and from this free living ancestor, at the same time, three branches were arisen. Three branches, that is called the parallel evolution, because at the same time, in the evolutionary history, three different things have occurred at the same time. It is called parallel evolution. On one side, this parallel evolution has given rise to cephalocardiates. On the other side, they have given rise to the free swimming tunicates, larvacean, and on the third side, they have given rise to vertebrate. So this is the Barrington hypothesis, which is suggesting that such type of creature might be in the line of the evolution of the Hyrcardates, though the we don't have any direct fossil record of them, but based on the similarities and dissimilarities, we can put in this evolutionary tree uh, some branches or the groups of organisms at various uh, level of this tree. This is all about the evolution of the echinodermates. Thanks.